You slapped me for being late? I was working overtime!
But while I was working, you were sleeping with someone else!
How could you?
I pushed my apartment door open after another brutal double shift, carrying overtime cash and hope for our anniversary dinner. Before I could breathe, Emma slapped me hard and shouted that I was selfish for arriving home so late today. My cheek burned, and I whispered, asking why she reacted like that when I had been working nonstop for us. She glared at me and said, "You never care," before turning away like my exhaustion meant nothing to her anymore. I tried explaining I had worked 3 double shifts, but she raised her hand again like she wanted another fight. I stepped back and said, "Emma, please just listen." But she scoffed and walked toward the kitchen without slowing down. My legs shook, and I placed the envelope on the table, saying that it was meant for our celebration tonight. She didn't respond, only muttering something about me choosing work over her again, words sharp enough to cut through me. I followed her and said, "I'm doing everything I can," but she kept repeating that I ruined her entire evening. When she threw her phone onto the table, I sighed and asked her to calm down and talk to me. She pointed at the clock and yelled, "You never show up when I need you," like time mattered more to her. I rubbed my face and said, "Emma, I'm trying." But she pushed past me again, making me feel completely unwanted. Her footsteps faded, and I leaned over the table, whispering to myself that something about her anger felt strangely planned. While breathing heavily, I noticed her phone screen light up, and a message preview appeared from someone named Liam today. My heart thumped as I whispered, "Who is Liam?" though Emma's voice from the hallway demanded that I leave her. I stared at the glowing screen and said, "Emma, your phone just buzzed," but she shouted back that I shouldn't. Her fear sounded unnatural, and I muttered, "Why react like that?" while stepping closer to the phone still lighting the. Emma ran back, grabbed the phone quickly, and said, "Stop snooping," though I hadn't even moved toward it before she snatched. I raised my hands and said, "I'm not touching anything," but she shook her head like I'd committed something unforgivable. Trying to breathe normally, I asked, "Emma, what is going on?" but she muttered that I should stop pretending I'm. I felt my stomach twist and said, "I came home with good news," but she ignored me completely and turned. I stepped closer and whispered, "Can you just listen?" though she crossed her arms and stared at the wall like. My voice broke as I said, "I'm tired, Emma," but she replied coldly that tiredness was not an excuse to. I sighed and placed my hands on the chair, whispering that I only wanted peace, but she acted like peace. She turned away again, and I murmured, "Why are you angry?" though she replied that I should already know without. I studied her trembling shoulders and said, "Emma, something feels off," but she snapped that I always imagine problems tonight. I leaned closer and whispered, "Is there someone else?" and she gasped loudly before denying it so quickly it sounded. Her eyes darted toward the table, and I followed her gaze, noticing the phone still glowing like a silent accusation. I took one step toward it, saying, "Emma, what are you hiding?" but she rushed forward and grabbed it before. My breath tightened, and I whispered, "Please tell me the truth," though she insisted there was nothing important tonight here. I stared at her shaking hands and said, "Emma, this doesn't feel right," but she avoided my eyes like honesty. Trying to steady myself, I said, "Why is Liam messaging you?" And the room went silent as her face twisted. Emma whispered, "Stop," but her voice cracked, and I repeated my question, feeling my heart pound as the truth hung. She tried walking away again, but I stepped forward and said, "Please don't lie," though the panic in her eyes. I stood frozen as she whispered, "It's nothing," but her trembling hands betrayed her, making me feel like the floor. I leaned on the table and whispered, "Emma, I need the truth," but she shut her eyes tight. "Today, please." Silence filled the room until I finally stepped back, whispering that something about tonight felt like the beginning of something. She didn't answer, and as she walked away again, my gaze returned to her glowing phone, the message from Liam. My hand trembled as I whispered, "What are you hiding from me?" the question echoing in my mind louder than. I stood quietly in the dim light, staring at the empty hallway, knowing something inside my marriage had cracked beyond. I grabbed Emma's phone after she stormed into the shower, telling myself I needed truth more than false peace tonight. My hands shook as I whispered, "Please don't let this be real," but the screen unlocked without hesitation under my fingers. The first message I opened showed her telling Liam she loved last night, and my heartbeat slammed painfully against my chest. I scrolled further and whispered, "No, no," as dates and hotel confirmations appeared clearly, proving everything I feared was already happening. One message read, He's easy to manipulate because he's always working. And my vision blurred from the weight crushing me. I whispered, "Easy to manipulate?" hearing my voice tremble like something inside me had already begun collapsing faster than I expected. My fingers hovered as I opened another thread where she joked about my exhaustion, calling me boring while laughing with him. I felt tears rise when I read, "He's too tired to notice anything," because those words cut deeper than any physical slap. I whispered, "Emma, how could you?" But the silence around me only made the truth louder than anything she ever said. The bathroom door opened and Emma stepped out, shouting, "Why are you on my phone?" Like I had committed unforgivable betrayal now. I held up the screen and said, "Explain this," but she snatched the phone and screamed that I was invading her privacy. I shouted, "Privacy? You cheated." But she pointed at me and said I always twist things because I cannot handle real emotional conversations. My voice shook as I said, "These are hotel bookings," but she shouted louder, claiming Liam was lying and manipulating the conversations completely. I replied, "The receipts have your name," but she screamed again, saying I shouldn't read things that don't concern me at all. I stepped back and said, "Our marriage concerns me." But she threw her towel aside and yelled that I always make everything difficult. I whispered, "Why mock me for working?" And she rolled her eyes, shouting that I never listen unless there's drama tearing everything down. I pointed to the phone and said, "You destroyed me." But she screamed that I was dramatic and should grow up finally. I whispered, "You mocked my exhaustion," and she answered, "Because you're never here," like cheating was justified because I worked overtime always. My chest tightened as I said, "I worked for us," but she shouted that I worked only to feel important in life. I dropped my hands and whispered, "I'm breaking," but she scoffed and claimed I enjoyed playing the victim when nothing serious happened tonight. My voice cracked as I said, "Hotel rooms happened," but she refused to respond, grabbing her clothes while muttering angrily under her breath. I whispered, "Why him?" But she didn't answer, only slamming the bedroom door like that could erase everything I had just seen. I walked outside, whispering, "I can't breathe," as the cold air hit my face harder than her slap earlier tonight. I called Ryan and said, "I need you," barely able to speak while trying not to collapse completely on the pavement. Ryan answered immediately, saying, "Tell me everything," and I broke, explaining every message, every lie, every cruel line that destroyed me. He said, "Ethan, this isn't just cheating," and his calm voice steadied me while my hands trembled harder than they ever had. I whispered, "She said I'm easy to manipulate," and Ryan replied, "That means she's been doing this longer than you ever imagined possible." I leaned against my car and said, "I thought she loved me," but Ryan said cheating people love control more than partners. I whispered, "I feel stupid," and he replied, "You trusted her, not stupid," giving me the first comfort I felt all night. I sat inside my car and said, "Everything hurts," but Ryan told me to breathe and reminded me that truth is still necessary. I whispered, "My marriage is dead," and Ryan replied, "It died when she chose lies," words that echoed painfully yet honestly. I leaned on the steering wheel and said, "I tried so hard," but Ryan said effort means nothing to someone determined to betray. I whispered, "What do I do now?" And he told me to stay somewhere safe while processing everything without her influence tonight. I nodded even though he couldn't see and whispered, "I can't go back inside," because the apartment felt poisonous now. Ryan said, "Stay here if needed," and his steady tone kept me grounded while my mind spiraled uncontrollably through everything I read. I whispered, she laughed at me, and he replied, "That's cruelty, not love," making me realize this betrayal carried intention, not accident. I stared at the dark street and whispered, "She never cared," as the final pieces of denial slowly slipped away completely. Ryan said, "You deserved loyalty," and hearing that filled my chest with both relief and unbearable sadness mixed together. I whispered, "I thought working overtime helped us," but now I saw she used my effort as distance to betray me. The night grew colder as I whispered, "She never loved me," realizing Emma only cared about what she could take from me. I lay back in my seat and whispered, "I'm done," knowing tonight marked the moment everything inside me finally shattered forever. Emma woke up acting gentle, brushing her hair back and whispering, "Morning, about last night, I was just angry, okay? Like nothing shattered me yesterday." I stared at her and said, "Angry doesn't explain hotel bookings." But she laughed softly and told me I always jump to dramatic conclusions too quickly. I replied, "You cheated." But she shook her head and whispered, "No, I overreacted. You know I get emotional sometimes." Before I could answer, Her phone buzzed loudly beside her, and a message from Liam flashed across the glowing lock screen instantly. I whispered, "Again," and she snatched the phone so fast it nearly slipped from her shaking hands completely. She forced a smile and said, "He's just a friend." But her voice trembled like something inside her already understood the lie wouldn't hold. I said, "Friends don't book hotel rooms," but she fired back, "You're overthinking everything because you're stressed from work." I clenched my jaw and whispered, "I saw everything," yet she rolled her eyes dramatically and said, "You never trust me unless I'm perfect." I answered, "I trusted you completely," but she sighed and muttered that trust shouldn't include reading her messages whenever I feel insecure suddenly. I stepped closer and said, "I didn't feel insecure. I felt betrayed." She crossed her arms tightly and replied, "You're being paranoid, Ethan. Liam isn't what you think." I whispered, "Then what is he?" And she looked away, pretending to adjust her shirt, avoiding my eyes completely. She said, "He's someone I talk to when you're too busy." Words sharp enough to cut through whatever hope I still held. I whispered, "That's worse," but she stepped forward and touched my arm, saying softly, "Let's move on, please. I hate fighting." I pulled away and said, "You're lying again," and her smile vanished instantly. She snapped, "You always try to ruin peaceful mornings." Like my pain was an inconvenience she wanted to silence instantly. I whispered, "Stop twisting this." But she raised her voice and said, "If you trusted me, we wouldn't be here right now." I whispered, "We're here because of your choices," but she grabbed her purse and muttered, "I'm done explaining myself to someone who refuses to listen." My chest felt numb as I said, "You haven't explained anything," but she slammed the bathroom door and turned on the water loudly. I sat on the edge of the bed whispering, "Why are you pretending nothing happened?" But no answer came except running water drowning everything. The moment I stepped into work, Mark noticed my shaky hands and asked, "Ethan, are you okay?" I whispered, "Rough night." But he studied me carefully and said, "Rough nights don't usually make you look this broken." I forced a weak smile and said, "I'll get through it," though my voice cracked enough to betray the truth instantly. Mark placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "If you need time, take it. Don't destroy yourself trying to stand straight." I whispered, "Thank you," and kept working, though every tool felt heavier because my mind replayed Emma's denial repeatedly. During lunch, I stepped outside and called Ryan, saying, "She's lying again." Ryan replied, "What happened now?" And I explained how Emma acted sweet, twisted everything, and then hid another message from Liam instantly. He sighed and said, "She's gaslighting you because she's scared the truth is slipping." I whispered, "She said he's just a friend," but Ryan answered, "Friends don't hide phones like weapons." I rubbed my forehead and asked, "Why does she lie so confidently?" Ryan replied, "Because she's practiced. People like her rewrite stories until you doubt your own mind." I whispered, "It almost worked," because for a moment her calm tone nearly convinced me I imagined everything. Ryan said, "Ethan," I looked into Liam, and my stomach twisted immediately. I whispered, "What did you find?" He hesitated before saying, "He's not random. He's her ex. He moved back 2 months ago." I leaned against the brick wall and whispered, "Her ex," feeling the truth hit harder than anything Emma ever admitted. Ryan said, "Everything lines up now, the distance, her sudden anger, her excuses." I whispered, "She went back to him," and the words tasted bitter and final. Ryan said, "She never cut ties. She just waited for a chance." I whispered, "Why didn't I see it?" He replied, "Because you loved her honestly. You weren't looking for danger in someone you trusted." My throat tightened as I said, "This explains every strange moment." Ryan answered, "Exactly. She didn't slip into cheating. She returned to something familiar." I whispered, "I feel stupid again," but Ryan said, "No. She's manipulative. You're human." I stared at the ground and whispered, "Everything she said this morning was rehearsed." Ryan replied, "She's trying to keep control. Gaslighting is her defense." I whispered, "Then my trust is gone," and Ryan replied, "It should be. She crossed a line she can't undo." I closed my eyes and whispered, "I can't keep pretending." Ryan said, "Then stop. Face the truth, even if it hurts." I ended the call, whispering to myself, "She broke me with lies," finally understanding that everything from her anger to her sweetness was strategy, not love. Walking back inside, I felt something inside me quietly collapse, the final piece of trust falling apart completely. Ryan arrived that afternoon, holding his phone tightly and saying, "Ethan, You need to see this now before confronting her again. I whispered, please don't let it be worse. But he shook his head slowly and handed me security footage from the hotel lobby. My stomach clenched as I asked, is that her? Watching Emma walking beside Liam laughing, touching his arm like everything between them never ended. Ryan said, 3 nights, Ethan, and my chest burned while I whispered, 3 nights while I broke myself working overtime for us. I stared at the screen and whispered. She didn't even hide. Feeling something inside me collapse like walls suddenly crumbling under heavy rain. Ryan placed a hand on my shoulder and said, you deserve the truth, even when it hurts more than you expected tonight. I whispered, I thought she was lonely, but Ryan said, she wasn't lonely, she was lying and enjoying attention behind your back. I rubbed my forehead and whispered, I need to confront her again, though fear and disgust twisted inside my chest like something tearing painfully apart. When Emma walked in, she said, why is he here again? And I replied, to show me what you've been doing behind my back. She frowned and said, what now, Ethan? But Ryan raised his phone, and I whispered, explain this footage right now, Emma. Her face went pale before she screamed, you're spying on me? Twisting the story instantly like she practiced this kind of manipulation for years. I shouted, you cheated again, and she switched, crying suddenly, saying, I felt lonely, Ethan. You're always working and never home. I whispered, lonely? You booked hotel rooms, but she yelled back, because you ignore me, and I needed someone who listens occasionally. I stepped forward and said, you replaced honesty with lies, but she screamed louder, stop pretending you're perfect, Ethan, voice filled with anger. I whispered, I never said I was perfect, and she shouted, then stop acting like I'm the only wrong one here. Ryan muttered, unbelievable, while I said, Emma, you destroyed everything, not me, but she cried harder, grabbing the couch for stability suddenly. She sobbed, you pushed me away, and I whispered, no, you used my loyalty as your excuse to betray me repeatedly. Emma's expression darkened as she shouted, maybe we should divorce, voice trembling with both threat and desperation mixed together painfully. I whispered, you want divorce now? And she replied, maybe I deserve better than someone who never prioritizes our marriage. My chest tightened as I whispered, better? You're sleeping with someone else. And she screamed, you don't satisfy my emotional needs. Ryan stepped forward and said, Emma, stop blaming him for your choices. But she snapped, stay out of our marriage completely. I whispered, marriage? You ended it. And she suddenly said coldly, if we divorce, I'll take everything. You owe me everything. Fear rushed through me as I whispered, everything, but she smiled thinly and said, yes, Ethan. You'll regret pushing me this far now. Ryan whispered, don't let her scare you. And I asked, why threaten me if you said you were lonely? Emma rolled her eyes and said, because you're being dramatic again, switching from rage to calmness like flipping a simple switch instantly. I whispered, your lies are exhausting, and she replied, then stop questioning me and things will calm down eventually. I took a slow breath and said, I see you clearly now, while she muttered, no, you see what you want to imagine. Ryan whispered, she's manipulating you, and Emma glared at him, saying, he doesn't need your input ruining our life. I whispered, my life is already ruined, but she scoffed, because you can't handle one mistake without destroying everything. I replied, this wasn't one mistake, pointing toward Ryan's phone while Emma covered her face dramatically again. She whispered, I'm sorry, then immediately shouted, but you made me feel abandoned, switching emotions so fast my head spun painfully. I whispered, stop shifting blame, and she shot back, you're impossible to talk to, walking away toward the bedroom angrily. Ryan said, Ethan, she isn't remorseful, and I whispered, she just wants control, not forgiveness or truth. Ryan nodded and said, then protect yourself. Don't let fear stop you from doing what you must now. I whispered, I won't, though part of me still trembled at the idea of leaving everything behind because of her betrayal. When I returned home alone that night, the apartment felt heavier, like sadness hung in the air even without her presence. I dropped to my knees beside the bed, whispering, how did we get here? Before noticing something metallic stuck underneath the mattress. I reached under and pulled out a bracelet, cold and engraved with 2 clear letters that turned my stomach immediately. I whispered, LC, realizing Liam's initials stared at me directly, confirming Emma didn't even try hiding their connection anymore. Holding the bracelet tightly, I whispered, this is the final proof, feeling anger replace every trace of confusion or denial completely. I sat back against the wall and whispered, I'm done, understanding I no longer loved the version of her standing in this home. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was carved into metal, into messages, into footage, into every broken piece of my heart tonight. Mark called me into his office early that morning and said, "Ethan, we received a complaint from your wife yesterday afternoon." I stared at him and whispered, "A complaint?" And he nodded slowly while handing me the printed statement Emma had submitted against me. I read her lies and whispered. She said I emotionally abused her, feeling my stomach twist painfully as disbelief settled heavier than expected. Mark leaned forward and said, "I don't believe this. I've known you years. You're not the man she describes at all." I whispered, "She's trying to ruin me before filing divorce papers." And Mark replied, "That's what it looks like now, unfortunately." I covered my face and said, "She wants full control." And Mark answered, "She chose the wrong method. This complaint is falling apart quickly." I whispered, "Why?" And he said, "Her story doesn't match anything from your co-workers, your record, or your behavior in this workplace ever." I muttered, "She's desperate." And Mark said, "She's manipulating. Don't let this crush you. Fight back with evidence and support." I nodded slowly and whispered, "I have proof," thinking about the messages, the hotel footage, and Liam's bracelet under the bed. As I walked outside, Ryan called and said, "I heard from Mark. She really filed a complaint trying to destroy your job." I whispered, "She wants everything." And he replied, "She wants power, not truth. Bring the evidence over. I'll help organize everything today." When I arrived at his place, Ryan's sister Sarah opened the door and said, "You must be Ethan." Ryan told me everything happening. Her calm voice surprised me when she added, "You look exhausted. Sit down. You don't have to pretend you're okay now." I whispered, "Thank you," feeling an unexpected sense of peace as she handed me water and said, "Let's help you breathe again." Ryan walked in and said, "All right, show me what you have." And I handed him the footage, screenshots, and her threatening messages collected. He scanned them and said, "This destroys her claims. You've been patient, but now you need to protect yourself seriously moving forward." I whispered, "I'm tired of suffering," and Ryan replied, "Then stop standing in the fire she keeps lighting under you." Sarah sat beside me and said gently, "Sometimes leaving isn't weakness. Sometimes it's survival when love becomes punishment instead." Her words hit harder than expected, and I whispered, "I don't even recognize myself anymore," feeling tears I didn't want to show. Sarah said, "Because she drained every part of you." And I nodded, whispering, "I stayed trying to fix something already dead." Ryan added, "So let's end it. Pack your bags. Leave before she destroys more than your marriage." I whispered, "Leave today?" And Sarah nodded softly, saying, "You've already stayed longer than she deserved." My chest felt heavy, but for the first time, the heaviness didn't scare me. It pushed me toward choosing myself finally. I whispered, "Okay, I'll leave," and Ryan said, "Good. I'm coming with you. You're not walking into that house alone now." When we reached the apartment, Emma stood in the hallway and shouted, "Where have you been?" "I've been calling all morning." I replied, "I know," and she stepped closer, saying, "We can fix this. Don't make decisions while angry." I walked past her toward the bedroom, saying, "I'm packing," and she grabbed my arm tightly, whispering, "You can't leave me now." I pulled free and said, "You already left us when you chose him," and her face twisted as she whispered, "It wasn't like that." I opened the closet and said, "You filed a false complaint against me." But she shouted, "Because you wouldn't understand my pain." I whispered, "Your pain? You cheated and lied repeatedly." And she cried louder, saying, "I only wanted attention you never gave me." Ryan stepped forward, but I said, "It's fine," before Emma screamed, "You can't walk out. I won't let you destroy everything." I zipped my bag and whispered, "You destroyed everything long before today." And she dropped to her knees dramatically, sobbing loudly. I stepped around her, and she grabbed my shirt, whispering, "Please don't leave me. I'll fix everything. I swear I will fix everything." I whispered, "No," and she cried harder, saying, "I made mistakes. But I can change. Don't throw us away like this." I walked toward the door, and she shouted, "If you leave now, you'll regret it forever. You'll miss me, Ethan." I whispered, "I miss the woman I thought you were." And her expression shattered instantly like glass beneath heavy pressure. She whispered, "Liam never cared about me either." And the desperation in her voice told me her world had already started collapsing deeply. I didn't turn back. I said, "That isn't my problem anymore," and walked out the door for the final time completely. Outside, Ryan exhaled deeply and said, You did the right thing, while Sarah whispered. You finally chose yourself. For the first time in months, I felt air enter my lungs without pain, whispering to myself, this choice saved me today. Ryan opened the door when I returned from a short walk and asked, You okay? And I whispered, better than yesterday somehow. He nodded and said, Good. You're safe here. And the calmness in his voice made my chest loosen more than I expected today. My phone buzzed again, showing Emma's 10th missed call, and Ryan muttered, She's spiraling, while I whispered, I don't want to answer. He nodded and said, You shouldn't, before Sarah walked in carrying tea and saying softly, You look lighter than the last few days. I whispered, maybe because leaving finally opened space to breathe, and she replied, Pain fades when the source stops feeding it constantly. My phone buzzed again with a message. Please pick up. I made a mistake. I turned it off without hesitation and exhaled quietly. Sarah asked, Do you feel guilty? And I whispered, A little, but I shouldn't, while she nodded and said, Exactly. Her choices were hers alone. Ryan added, And karma moves faster when someone builds their entire world on lies, making me laugh quietly for the first time in days. Later that afternoon, Mark called and said, Her complaint collapsed. Everyone confirmed she lied. You're completely cleared, Ethan. I whispered, Thank you. And he replied, Don't thank me. Thank the truth. It always rises eventually. After the call, Ryan said, See? Everything she tried to do is crumbling. And I whispered, Yeah, it's happening without me lifting a finger. Sarah sat beside me and said gently, Let go of responsibility for her downfall. You didn't push her. She tripped over her own lies. I whispered, You're right, and she smiled softly, saying, You've been blaming yourself for something you never caused. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from Emma. He blocked me. Please talk to me. I'm falling apart. I whispered, Liam blocked her, and Ryan shook his head, saying he used her. That's what men like him do every time. Sarah added, He would have left eventually. You just discovered it sooner. And I whispered, Why did she throw everything away for someone like him? She replied, People who don't value themselves chase anyone who gives attention. It isn't love, it's desperation pretending to be affection. I leaned back and whispered, I gave her stability. He gave her chaos. She chose chaos. Ryan nodded and said, Some people crave excitement more than loyalty. Doesn't make it right. Just explains her decisions. My phone rang again, and Emma's shaky voice message appeared. Ryan said, Don't listen unless you're ready. And I whispered, I'll wait. Sarah placed a gentle hand on my arm and said, Remember your healing. Don't let her drag you back into her storm now. I whispered, I won't, and she smiled, saying, Good. You've come too far to fall back into that pain again. That evening, word spread through mutual friends. One of them called and said, Ethan, everyone knows what she did. People are distancing themselves. I whispered, I didn't want that, but she said, Actions have consequences. She destroyed her own support system completely. Another friend messaged saying Liam had used other women the same way, disappearing once they became attached. I whispered, She didn't know who he really was. And Ryan responded, She didn't want to know. Truth ruins fantasies. Sarah added softly, And she built a fantasy on top of your pain, making my chest tighten with strange calmness. Emma called again, leaving another voice message. Please, Ethan. I can't breathe. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please come home. I stared at the screen and whispered, Why do I feel nothing? And Sarah answered, Because your heart finally stopped bleeding. Ryan nodded and said, You're free now. Pain doesn't control you anymore. I opened the voice message and listened to her sobbing, saying he left me. I made a mistake, and I need you. Her voice once broke me, but now it felt distant, like hearing a stranger cry in another room. I whispered, This is karma speaking. And Ryan said, Karma always arrives when lies have nowhere left to hide anymore. Sarah added, This is the result of her choices, not yours, reminding me again not to accept responsibility for her downfall. I whispered, I don't hate her anymore, surprising even myself as the words left my mouth quietly. Sarah smiled and said, That's healing. Hate is still attachment. You're letting go. Ryan added, And letting go is the best revenge. Silence hurts louder than shouting. My phone buzzed again with another message. Please talk to me. I'll do anything. Don't leave me alone right now. I whispered, I'm not going back, and Sarah nodded, saying, Good. Moving forward means protecting your peace fiercely. Ryan added, "She's drowning because she built everything on manipulation. You're rising because you finally chose yourself." I whispered, "Feels strange, but good." And Sarah said, "That feeling is freedom in its first steps." When the final voice message came, her crying was louder, broken, desperate, saying, "Ethan, please. I'm begging you." I listened quietly until the end and whispered, "I'm done." Not with anger, but with acceptance that couldn't be shaken anymore. Sarah smiled softly and said, "I'm proud of you," while Ryan added, "You're finally walking toward a life she can't ruin." I whispered, "Karma answered everything I couldn't." And for the first time in years, I felt genuinely unburdened, steady, and ready to rebuild. Ryan opened the door when someone knocked, and he said, "Ethan, she's here." And my chest tightened before I even looked up. I whispered, "Already?" But he nodded and stepped aside as Emma stood in the doorway looking thinner, pale, and completely beaten down emotionally. She whispered, "Ethan, please talk to me." And I replied, "Why are you here?" trying to keep my voice steady despite everything happening inside me. Emma stepped forward and said, "I just need a minute. Please don't shut me out like this," sounding desperate enough to shake the hallway. I whispered, "You shut me out first," but she shook her head quickly and said, "I wasn't thinking clearly. I made terrible mistakes." I crossed my arms and whispered, "Mistakes don't stretch across months," but she wiped her eyes and said, "I swear I've changed. Please believe me." I replied, "Changed because he left you?" And her silence confirmed the truth louder than anything she might have said afterward today. Emma whispered, "No, I changed because losing you scared me." But I shook my head and said, "You didn't lose me, you threw me away." Her voice cracked as she said, "I didn't know what I wanted." And I whispered, "You knew exactly what you wanted when you kept choosing him." Emma reached for my hand and said, "Can't we start fresh? I'll do anything now. I'll be who you needed before." I pulled my hand away and whispered, "You don't get to shape yourself after breaking me." And she broke into tears instantly. She cried, "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm sorry for everything," but I whispered, "You're sorry for losing control, not for cheating." She shook her head violently and said, "No, I'm sorry because I hurt you." And I whispered, "If that were true, you'd have stopped the first time." Emma dropped onto the couch, sobbing as she said, "I can't live without you." But I whispered, "Then you shouldn't have lived like I didn't matter." She looked up with red eyes and whispered, "Please give me another chance." And I replied, "You had every chance before destroying us." Emma whispered, "I'll be better. I'll prove it." But I shook my head and said, "I'm not the man you controlled anymore." She whispered, "I still love you." And I replied, "You loved having power, not partnership," hearing my voice steady for the first time. Emma whispered, "Don't leave me like everyone else." But I said, "You pushed me away long before I walked out the door." She clutched her chest and whispered, "I'm breaking, Ethan." But I answered, "You broke me first and watched without caring." Emma reached for my arm again and said, "I need you." But I stepped back and whispered, "I finally realized I don't need your chaos." She cried, "I'm begging you." But I whispered, "I begged for honesty, and you gave me betrayal instead." Emma whispered, "So that's it?" And I replied, "Yes. I won't rebuild a future on a foundation of lies and manipulation." She buried her face in her hands and whispered, "I can't accept this." And I said, "Acceptance isn't optional anymore." When she finally stood, she whispered, "Please don't hate me." And I replied, "I don't. Hate means I'd still be tied to you." She looked confused as I whispered, "I'm free now," and something in her expression collapsed completely at those two simple words. Emma whispered, "You're choosing to leave forever?" And I replied, "I'm choosing myself for the first time." She staggered toward the door and said, "Goodbye, Ethan," voice trembling as if the word tore something inside her apart painfully. I whispered, "Goodbye," and she walked out slowly, shoulders shaking, disappearing down the hallway without looking back again. When the door closed, Ryan whispered, "You handled that with strength," but I exhaled and said, "I finally said what needed saying." He nodded and said, "This is your turning point." And I whispered, "It feels like stepping out of a heavy shadow." A quiet moment passed before I said, "I'm not broken anymore," surprising myself with how true it finally sounded. Ryan smiled and said, "You rebuilt yourself piece by piece." And I whispered, "And she can't take any of that away." I stepped outside for fresh air, inhaling deeply as the evening breeze brushed against my face more gently than expected tonight. I whispered, "This pain didn't ruin me," feeling the truth settle calmly inside my chest like a final piece clicking into place. Sarah walked up beside me and said softly, "You did the right thing," and her steady presence grounded me instantly. I whispered, "For once I believe that," and she smiled warmly, saying, "Good. Believing it is the first step to living again." I looked up at the fading sky and whispered, "My life begins now," feeling hope instead of heartbreak for the first time in years. Sarah nodded and said, "You're stronger than you realize," while I whispered, "Maybe strength is choosing peace over chaos." She smiled and said, "Then you're already winning." And something inside me relaxed, finally letting go of everything Emma once controlled. I whispered, "I'm ready to move on," and Sarah replied, "And you deserve every bit of the life waiting ahead of you now." I stepped forward, breathing deeply again, whispering, "This is my beginning," knowing I had finally chosen myself without hesitation or fear.